We're going to be going over peroxisomes. Peroxisomes are membrane-enclosed organelles involved in several physiological processes. This includes beta-oxidation of very long-chain fatty acids, alpha-oxidation, catabolism of branched-chain fatty acids, amino acids, and ethanol, and the synthesis of cholesterol, bile acids, and plasmalogens. A defect or mutation in peroxisomal function could have a large effect on our body. I included this electron micrography image to show you what a peroxisome looks like relative to other structures. So here you see the peroxisomes, and here you see the mitochondria and rough ER, and you can see the peroxisomes are about the same size as lysosomes. So if a patient has a dysfunctional peroxisome, what do you think would happen? Well, the main problem is going to be an accumulation of very long-chain fatty acids in the brain, adrenal, plasma, and red blood cells, which can cause congenital or acquired disease. This can affect your central nervous system in a very negative way. Let's think this through. Peroxisomes are used in cholesterol and fatty acid synthesis, which help form phospholipids, right? Here you see a cellular membrane with all these phospholipids, and these are just cellular receptors and transporters. Phospholipids are major components of our cellular membranes and in the central nervous system are myelin sheet. Recall that myelin functions by insulating our nerve fibers, increasing the speed at which neural impulses are conducted. So if our peroxisomes are not functioning properly and our myelin isn't formed properly, demyelination can occur. There are 3 diseases pertaining to the peroxisome that you need to be aware of for your exam. We will be talking more in detail about each one, but I made a little chart to summarize the 3 diseases. Zellweger syndrome, Refsum disease, and adrenoleukodystrophy. Now we'll go through what each disease is and what causes them and what they look like. Zellweger is the most severe and presents with significant disease at birth, and patients typically die within the first year of life. What gene can be mutated to produce Zellweger syndrome? The most important enzyme family to know about here is a peroxin or PEX gene, and these peroxins are important for both biogenesis of peroxisomes and for importing enzymes into peroxisomes. Inheriting a defective copy of one of the genes in this family from each parent is the most common cause of Zellweger syndrome. So what inheritance pattern is this? Autosomal recessive. From birth, the first thing you'll notice on a newborn with Zellweger syndrome are flattened facial features and a broad nasal bridge. Soon after, you may notice evidence of demyelination. What kind of symptoms do you see in a baby with demyelination? You can see hypotonia, decrease in vision and hearing, and also seizures. Here's a good picture demonstrating hypotonia in a baby with Zellweger's. You can see how floppy the baby really looks. You can also see flattened facial features, as well as liver and renal failure. Now let's go over Refsum disease, which is most often caused by a defect in the gene phytenyl-CoA hydroxylase. And this disease also has an autosomal recessive inheritance. This is a peroxisomal enzyme that normally helps break down a molecule called phytanic acid, which is associated with chlorophyll and something we get from our diet. If this enzyme is deficient, phytanic acid builds up and causes a variety of symptoms. It first presents in adolescence and mostly starts with neurological symptoms, like worsening of vision, sense of smell, and progressing to hearing loss and ataxia. You can also see some toe abnormalities such as long, slender toes or even shortening of toes. And here's an image so you won't forget what that looks like. Years later, you can also see changes in skin like ichthyosis and cardiac conduction abnormalities. So how do you treat this? Well, phytanic acid is associated with chlorophyll, so what if you just don't eat green vegetables? Actually, and surprisingly, eating green vegetables won't affect these patients at all, but what they do need to avoid in their diet is animal fats, particularly from grazing animals. Cows, for example, eat grass all day, and phytanic acid gets concentrated in their fat way more than you would see in any vegetable. So this is what patients with Refsum disease needs to avoid. The last disease we'll go over is adrenoleukodystrophy. This gene, for one, has a great name, very easy to remember. It's called ABCD1. It encodes a protein that forms part of the channel that is used to import very long-chain fatty acids into the peroxisome, so without it, proximal functions won't be carried out properly. Now, ABCD1 is on the X chromosome, so this is an X-linked recessive disorder. Who do you think is more likely to get it, males or females? That would be males, since they only have one X chromosome, so they only need to inherit one defective gene, which is often from their mother, who is an asymptomatic carrier. The proximal function that is affected here is beta oxidation, and if you recall, beta oxidation is a process that generally occurs in the mitochondria. The overall process of beta oxidation is to break down fatty acids to acetyl-CoA, which can go on to the TCA cycle or which can be broken down further to ketones needed during fasting. Do you know when beta oxidation occurs in the peroxisome? When dealing with very long-chain free fatty acids, which are fatty acids with 22 or more carbon molecules. Peroxisomes have certain enzymes that are able to shorten the free fatty acid chain to a point where it can be transported to the mitochondria for further oxidation. Okay, so what's a classical clinical presentation of adrenoleukodystrophy? Well, that's a trick question because this one has different presentations. The most common three types are the childhood cerebral form, the adrenomyeloneuropathy form, and the adrenal insufficiency only form. The childhood cerebral form accounts for 35% of the adrenoleukodystrophy cases, and it presents in early childhood as progressive neurodegeneration. Although in the very beginning of the disease, the child may just have hyperactivity and disruptive behavior at school, so it is often first misdiagnosed as ADHD before it worsens. It can be fatal in a few years if left untreated. Here is a T2-weighted MRI of a brain of a patient diagnosed with the childhood cerebral form. And here is a T2 MRI of a brain without any abnormalities. If you recall in T2-weighted MRIs, CSF appears very bright, gray matter will appear light gray, and white matter appears dark gray. You can see in this MRI that there are lesions at the atrium of the lateral ventricle, at the corpus callosum, and posterior limb of the internal capsule. And when you compare it to an MRI of a healthy patient, you don't see any lesions. The next form is the adrenomyeloneuropathy form, which accounts for about 45% of cases, and it presents in young adulthood, like in the 20s and 30s, with progressive neuropathy and a weakening of the lower extremities. These patients will also develop adrenal insufficiency, and about half of them may eventually develop cerebral symptoms, such as cognitive decline and behavioral changes. The last form accounts for 20% of cases and usually occurs in early childhood with isolated adrenal insufficiency, but decades later it can progress to have demyelinating disease as well. And that's our video on peroxisomes. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up.